Hi, this video is all about the geohazards that we are likely to encounter or have to deal with here in Britain. The first thing to say is that the geohazards in Britain are really quite different from those experienced around the world. This graphic shows the most significant hazards faced in the British Isles. You can see that the highest ones on this list are actually human hazards. The biggest or the highest risk geohazard is radon gas. If we compare that with world geohazard risk, we can see that there's a very different scale of geohazards to deal with, and also a very different type of geohazard. So bearing in mind that British geohazards tend to be relatively minor, let's assess what level of risk they do actually pose. If we start with earthquakes, this graph shows us the exponential nature of the earthquake magnitude scale and how earthquakes of 6 and above are going to have a far greater amplitude of shaking and therefore more damage caused than ones that are less than 6. Now, in Britain, we might get 4 or 5 earthquakes every 100 years that are above a 5. The highest recorded was just over 6. So we don't see earthquakes on the same scale as perhaps in more tectonically active parts of the world. This map shows the earthquake epicenters in Britain over roughly the last 200 years. The more recent ones are shown in red from 1970 till present. That looks like a lot, but this plots every earthquake magnitude that's greater than a 2, which is really sort of the threshold of where people might just about start to feel it. If we look at an example of one of the largest British earthquakes, which occurred in April of 1990, centred on a small town in Shropshire called Bishop's Castle, that had a magnitude of 5.1. The map here shows the intensity of that earthquake plotted on a map of Britain. We can see the highest value there is 6 on the European macroseismic scale. If we look at that scale, we can see that the maximum intensity of this particular earthquake was very slight damage to buildings, such as cracks in plaster, small loose things falling off. It really isn't particularly major. There were no fatalities, no even major injuries from this particular earthquake. So although earthquakes are a relatively infrequent and minor hazard, we are faced though with the issues of landslides. Now, owing to the varied geology of Britain, we can see that there's a large spread of areas where there is a significant risk of landslide. If we look at where these occur stratigraphically, we can see that there are numerous examples throughout geological time where in Britain we see the right geology that may create a landslide hazard. Very often, if we read through the rock units involved, we can see it's where we have competent rocks like sandstones, conglomerates, limestones sitting on top of incompetent rocks like clays or shales. This type of sequence occurs fairly frequently in Britain's geological history. This can be exacerbated then, where we have changes to the patterns, for example, of rainfall. 2012 saw a large increase in the number of landslides that occurred. Each landslide is showed by a red dot on the map. This was 5 times our normal number. We can see that there's a very good correlation between the occurrence of these landslides and the increase in average rainfall. England, Wales, southern Scotland all got significantly higher rainfall during 2012 than we'd expect from the previous 30-year average. If we look at the costs of these landslides, we can see even though this was perhaps one of the biggest years for landslides, on a global scale it really is still very minor. Another feature of Britain's geology, which can lead to properties for hazards for properties, is that of shrinking and swelling clay. Clay will very slowly absorb or get rid of a large amount of water. When that happens, if it loses water, that clay can shrink significantly. If it gains water, it will swell or expand significantly. Now that can cause problems for buildings and their foundations that are built on clay. You can see the geology map of Britain on the right here links very closely to where there's a significant hazard for this, and obviously the deposition of clay. Subsidence can be an issue in other parts of the country as well. Often where we have rocks that are soluble, we have significant evaporite deposits in places like Cheshire, okay, the northeast, where either gypsum or halite could be dissolved into groundwater, which can cause cavities underground. Equally, limestone commonly occurs around Britain, which can dissolve perhaps far more slowly over time to create caverns and cavities. All of that, though, can lead to fairly sudden, in some cases, subsidence, with problems then for the buildings above. We can also get where significant amounts of surface water may wash out previously infilled irregularities in bedding surfaces. That again can lead to subsidence. So, to conclude, we do suffer geohazards in Britain, but they're on a smaller scale than we'll see globally, and they're perhaps more particularly linked to the geological history of localised parts of Britain. They are issues we need to be aware of, and they are issues we need to plan for. But as a significant hazard to life and limb, maybe not that great. Anyway, don't forget to come up with your interesting question and bring it along to class. I'll see you then.